The summer heat in Millbrook, Texas felt suffocating as 20-year-old Marcus Rivera stood in the living room of his childhood home, clutching the enlistment papers in his trembling hands. The ceiling fan creaked overhead, but it did nothing. To cool the tension that had been building for months between him and his father, Vincent sat in his worn leather recliner. The same chair where he'd watched countless football games and delivered life lessons to Marcus throughout his childhood. But now, his weathered face was twisted with disappointment and rage. At 52, Vincent had built Rivera Construction from the ground up, expecting his only son to follow in his footsteps and eventually take over the family business. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You're throwing your life away, Marcus, Vincent said, his voice low but seething. 20 years I've been building this company for you. 20 years of sweat, blood, and sacrifice so you could have something real, something lasting. Marcus's mother, Elena, stood in the doorway between the living room. In kitchen, her apron still tied around her waist from preparing dinner. Tears streamed down her face as she watched her husband and son tear each other apart with words. "Dad, you don't understand," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking. "I need to do this. I need to serve my country. I need to find my own path." Vincent slammed his fist on the armrest of his chair. Your path? Your path is here, with family, with responsibility. Not running off to some godforsaken desert to play soldier. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. His father had always been tough, demanding, but this was different. This was personal hatred, and it cut deeper than any criticism about his grades or his choice of friends ever had. "I've already signed the papers, Dad. I will report to basic training in 2 weeks." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena's quiet sobs were the only sound in the room. Vincent slowly rose from his chair, his 6-foot frame casting a shadow over his son. When he spoke, his voice was cold and final. "Then you're not my son anymore. You want to throw away everything I've built for you? Fine. But don't come crawling back here when you realize what a mistake you've made." Vincent's eyes, once warm with paternal love, now burned with betrayal. "You're dead to me, Marcus, dead to me." The words hung in the air like a curse. Marcus felt his world crumble around him. He'd expected anger, disappointment, maybe even a fight. But this complete rejection felt like death itself. Elena rushed forward, trying to bridge the gap between her husband and son. "Vincent, please. He's our boy. He's not our boy anymore." Vincent cut her off, never taking his eyes off Marcus. He made his choice. Now he can live with it. Marcus stood there for a moment, feeling smaller than he had since childhood. Without another word, he turned and walked to his room. 2 hours later, he was gone, leaving only a note for his mother telling her he loved her and would write when he could. Fort Benning, Georgia was a universe away from the comfortable suburb where Marcus had grown up. The drill sergeants were relentless, the training brutal, and the heat oppressive. But for Marcus, the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional wound his father had inflicted. During the few precious minutes of free time each day, Marcus would watch other recruits call home, hearing their families' voices full of pride and support. He envied them their connection to home, their certainty that someone was waiting for them. Private First Class Jake Morrison, a lanky kid from Minnesota, became Marcus's closest friend during basic training. Jake noticed that Marcus never called home, never talked about his family beyond mentioning his mother in passing. "You got people back home, Rivera?" Jake asked one evening as they cleaned their rifles. Marcus focused intently on the weapon in his hands. "My mom. What about your dad?" "Don't have one." Jake didn't push, but he understood. Everyone in the military had their stories, their reasons for being there. Some were running towards something, others running away. Jake suspected Marcus was doing both. The months of training transformed Marcus from a confused young man into a disciplined soldier. He excelled in marksmanship, showed natural leadership abilities, and earned the respect of his drill sergeants. But late at night, when the barracks were quiet, he would stare at the ceiling and wonder if his father ever thought about him. Elena sent letters regularly. updating him on neighborhood gossip and her garden, carefully avoiding any mention of Vincent or the construction company. Marcos could read between the lines. His father had forbidden any discussion of his son in the house. It was as if Marcus Rivera had never existed. After basic training, Marcus was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division. He threw himself into his military career with the same intensity his father had once applied to building his business. Rivera wanted to disown his son. Then Marcus would prove he didn't need his father's approval to succeed. 2 years into his military career, Sergeant Marcus Rivera found himself deployed to Afghanistan as part of Operation Enduring Freedom. Dusty mountainous terrain of the Hindu Kush was unlike anything he'd experienced in Texas or Georgia. Here, death lurked around every corner. The brotherhood forged between soldiers was the only thing that kept men sane. Marcus's squad was stationed at Forward Operating Base Chapman, a remote outpost that served as a crucial link in the supply chain for coalition forces. The days were long and dangerous, filled with patrol missions through hostile territory and the constant threat of IED attacks. Staff Sergeant Tommy Chen, a veteran with 3 deployments under his belt, took Marcus under his wing. Chen had a way of reading people, and he saw something in the young Texan that reminded him of himself at that age, a need to prove something, to be worth something. "You fight like you got nothing to lose, Rivera," Chen observed one day after a particularly intense firefight. "That's good and bad. Good because it makes you fearless. Bad because fearless soldiers sometimes make stupid decisions." Cleaning his M4 rifle, his hands steady, despite the adrenaline still coursing through his veins. "I'm not trying to be fearless, Sergeant. I'm trying to be useful." "To who? Your squad? Your country? Or your old man?" The question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He'd never talked about his father with anyone in his unit, but Chen had a way of seeing through people's defenses. "My father's dead to me, just like I'm dead to him." Chen nodded slowly. "Maybe, but you're not fighting for him anymore, are you?" "You're fighting for them," he gestured. "Toward the other soldiers in their squad. That's good, that's real. But don't throw your life away trying to prove something to a ghost." The conversation stayed with Marcus as the months passed. He began to understand that his anger toward his father, while justified, was also a burden. Every mission he completed, every commendation he received, every life he saved, none of it would matter to Vincent Rivera, because Vincent had chosen not to see it. But it mattered to Marcus. It mattered to his squad. It mattered to the Afghan civilians they protected, and the fellow soldiers whose lives he'd saved. Slowly, Marcus began to fight not to prove his worth to his father, but to prove it to himself. October 15, 2019, started like any other day at FOB Chapman. Marcus's squad was preparing for a routine patrol to check on a village that had been reporting increased Taliban activity. The mission was supposed to be straightforward, a show of force to reassure the local population and gather intelligence, but nothing in Afghanistan was ever routine. The convoy had barely left the base when the first explosion rocked their lead vehicle. Marcus, riding in the second Humvee, felt the shockwave as the IED detonated 50 meters ahead of them. Through the dust and smoke, he could see that the lead vehicle had flipped, trapping his fellow soldiers inside. Ambush, ambush. Came the radio call as gunfire erupted from 3 directions. The Taliban had set up a complex attack, using the IED to stop the convoy, and then attacking from concealed positions in the rocky terrain. Marcus's training kicked in immediately. As the squad's senior non-commissioned officer, he had to assess the situation and make split-second decisions that would mean the difference between life and death for his men. Chen, take Wilson and Rodriguez and establish a perimeter on the right flank. Marcus shouted over the gunfire. "Morrison, you're with me. We're going for the lead vehicle." The next 20 minutes felt like 20 hours. Marcus led his men through, withering enemy fire, using every piece of cover available as they fought their way toward the overturned Humvee. 2 of his soldiers were wounded in the crossfire, but Marcus refused to leave anyone behind. When they reached the lead vehicle, Marcus discovered that 3 soldiers were trapped inside, including Private Danny Walsh, a 19-year-old from Ohio who'd been in the country for only 6 weeks. Walsh was unconscious, and bleeding heavily from a head wound. The enemy fire was intensifying, and Marcus knew they had only minutes before the Taliban fighters would overrun their position. He made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life and make him a hero. "I'm going to draw their fire," Marcus told Morrison. "When I do, you and the others get these men out of here." "That's suicide, Sergeant," Morrison protested. "It's the only way." "That's an order, Jake." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus grabbed as much ammunition as he could carry and sprinted toward the largest concentration of enemy fighters. For the next 10 minutes, he single-handedly held off more than 20 Taliban fighters. Using his superior training and an almost supernatural awareness of the battlefield to outmaneuver and outfight an enemy that vastly outnumbered him, his actions gave his squad the time they needed to extract the wounded soldiers from the overturned vehicle and call in air support. When the Apache helicopters arrived, they found Marcus still fighting, wounded but alive. Having eliminated or driven off the entire enemy force, the after-action report would later describe Marcus's actions as extraordinary, valor in the face of overwhelming odds, and a selfless act of heroism that saved the lives of 7 American soldiers. But, in the moment, Marcus only cared that his men were alive and safe. Marcus spent the next 3 months recovering from his wounds at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Physical injuries, shrapnel wounds, a concussion, and a broken collarbone would heal. The emotional impact of the battle would take longer to process. It was during his recovery that he learned he was being recommended for the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration awarded by the United States government. The news should have filled him with pride, but instead, Marcus felt empty. All he could think about was how his father would never know, would never care. Alina had been notified of his injuries and had wanted to fly to Germany to be with him, but Marcus had convinced her to wait until he returned to the United States. He wasn't ready to face the questions about his father, wasn't ready to confront the pain he'd been carrying for 3 years. The medal ceremony was scheduled for 6 months later at the White House. Marcus would be flying back to the United States, not as the angry young man who'd left Millbrook, but as a decorated war hero whose actions had saved lives and inspired a nation, but success felt hollow without the one person whose approval he'd spent his entire life seeking, Jake Morrison, who had also been wounded in the attack, but less severely, visited Marcus during his recovery. The 2 men had been through hell together, and their friendship had been forged in the crucible of combat. "You ever going to tell your old man about all this?" Jake asked one afternoon as they sat in the hospital garden. Marcus shrugged. "The point he made his choice 3 years ago. He said I was dead to him. I guess I am. Maybe he's changed his mind. Maybe pigs can fly." Jake laughed, but his expression remained serious. "You know what I think? I think you're scared." "Of what?" "Of finding out he's proud of you. Because if he is, then you'll have to forgive him. If he's not, then you'll have to live with knowing that nothing you do will ever be enough." The conversation planted a seed in Marcus's mind. For 3 years, he'd been running from his father's rejection, using it as fuel for his military career. But what if Jake was right? What if his fear of reconciliation was greater than his fear of continued rejection? 6 months later, Marcus stood in his dress uniform in front of a mirror in a hotel room in Washington, D.C. Tomorrow, he will receive the Medal of Honor from the President of the United States. The medal citation would read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, while serving as squad leader with the 82nd Airborne Division during combat operations in Afghanistan." Alina had flown in from Texas the day before, and they'd spent the evening catching up on 3 years of missed conversations. She looked older, more tired, but her eyes still held the same warmth Marcus remembered from childhood. "I'm so proud of you." "Mijo," she said, using the childhood nickname she'd always called him. "Your father would be proud too, if he could see past his own stubbornness." Marcus felt the familiar pang of loss at the mention of his father. "Has he? ... Has he ever asked about me?" Alina's pause told him everything he needed to know. He reads, "Every letter you send me. He keeps newspaper clippings about your unit. He knows about the medal ceremony, But he won't come. I asked him to, he said. He said he didn't deserve to be there. The words surprised Marcus. In all his imagined conversations with his father, he'd never considered that Vincent might feel unworthy rather than simply uncaring. What do you mean? He's been carrying around a lot of guilt, Marcus. 3 years of regret. He knows he was wrong, but he's too proud to admit it. He thinks you hate him. Marcus sat down heavily on the hotel bed. I don't hate him, Mom. I'm angry, I'm hurt, but I don't hate him. Then maybe it's time you told him that. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about his father. He imagined Vincent working late at the construction company. Alone in the office he'd built to leave to his son, thought about all the times his father had taught him to use tools, to fix things, to build things that would last. Maybe his father had been building something else all along, not just a business, but a man. The next morning, as Marcus prepared for the medal ceremony, he made a decision. After the ceremony, he would go home to Millbrook, not to seek his father's approval, but to offer his forgiveness. It was time to stop running from the past and start building a future. The Medal of Honor ceremony was everything Marcus had imagined and more. The president spoke about courage, sacrifice, and the price of freedom. Marcus's fellow soldiers filled the audience, their faces proud and solemn as they watched their brother receive the nation's highest honor. But as Marcus stood at attention while the medal was placed around his neck, all he could think about was the empty seat where his father should have been. Lena sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face. But the absence of Vincent Rivera felt like a physical weight on Marcus's chest. After the ceremony, Marcus was surrounded by well-wishers, reporters, and fellow veterans. Everyone wanted to shake his hand, to thank him for his service, to tell him how proud they were. But the praise felt hollow without the one voice he'd been waiting to hear his entire life. 2 days later, Marcus flew back to Texas. He'd arranged to spend a week with his mother before returning to his new assignment at Fort Bragg. The flight seemed to take forever, and Marcus found himself rehearsing what he would say to his father if he saw him. Alina picked him up at the airport, and they drove through the familiar streets of Millbrook. The town looked smaller than Marcus remembered, more ordinary. The teenage problems that had once seemed insurmountable now felt trivial compared to the life-and-death decisions he'd been making for the past 3 years. He's been working late. Every night since the ceremony, Alina said as they pulled into the driveway of Marcus's childhood home, I think he's avoiding coming home because he knows you're here. Marcus nodded. He'd expected as much. Vincent Rivera had never been one to confront his emotions directly. He'd always been more comfortable with hammers and nails than with feelings and apologies. That evening, Marcus sat in his old bedroom looking at the posters and trophies that represented a life that seemed to belong to someone else. His high school football trophies seemed insignificant next to the Medal of Honor that now sat on his dresser. But they represented the same thing, a young man trying to make his father proud. Around 10 o'clock, Marcus heard the familiar sound of his father's truck pulling into the driveway. The engine shut off, and Marcus heard footsteps on the gravel, then the front door opening and closing. He waited, listening to his father's movements through the house, wondering if Vincent would come to his room or continue avoiding him. 20 minutes later, Marcus heard his father's bedroom door close. The house fell silent, but Marcus knew neither of them would sleep that night. The next morning, Marcus woke early and made coffee, just as he'd done countless mornings as a teenager. He sat at the kitchen table, still in his pajamas, when he heard his father's door open. Vincent appeared in the doorway, looking older and grayer than Marcus remembered. For a moment, neither man spoke. Vincent wore his work clothes, jeans, a flannel shirt, and steel-toed boots. He looked like he was preparing to go to work, but his eyes were fixed on his son. "Coffee smells good," Vincent said quietly. "Made it the way you taught me," Marcus replied. Vincent nodded and moved to the coffee maker, his movements careful and deliberate. He poured himself a cup and sat down across from Marcus at the table where they'd eaten countless meals together. "I saw the ceremony on TV," Vincent said, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. "Mom told me you keep newspaper clippings. I keep everything. Every letter your mother gets, every article about your unit, every news story about the medal. Vincent's hands shook slightly as he raised his coffee cup. "I've been proud of you. Every single day for 3 years, son. I just didn't know how to tell you." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. After 3 years of anger and resentment, hearing his father call him son again felt like coming back from the dead. "Then why didn't you come to the ceremony?" Marcus asked. Vincent's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't deserve to be there. Because I threw away the best thing in my life out of pride and stubbornness. Because I was afraid you'd look at me and see the man who called his own son dead." Marcus felt his own tears starting to fall. "I never stopped wanting you to be proud of me, Dad. Even when I hated you, even when I told myself I didn't care, I still wanted you to be proud. I am proud. I'm so proud I can barely breathe when I think about what you've done, what you've become. But I'm also ashamed. Ashamed of what I said, ashamed of what I did to you, ashamed that I wasn't man enough to admit I was wrong." The two men sat in silence for a moment, years of hurt and misunderstanding hanging between them like a wall. Finally, Vincent spoke. "Again, I built this company for you, Marcus. I wanted to give you something solid, something that would last. I thought the military would take you away from me, would change you into someone I didn't recognize. I was scared of losing you, so I pushed you away first." Marcus reached across the table and placed his hand on his father's. "You didn't lose? Me, Dad, you just forgot where to look." Vincent broke down then, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I'm sorry, son. I'm so sorry. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I'm sorry." "You already have it," Marcus said. "You've had it for years. I just didn't know how to give it to you." The two men stood up simultaneously and embraced, both crying openly for the first time in years. It was the hug that should have happened 3 years ago, the reconciliation that both men had been too proud to seek. Over the next few days, Marcus and Vincent began the slow process of rebuilding their relationship. They talked about the past, 3 years about Vincent's regret and Marcus's anger, about all the things they'd wanted to say but hadn't known how. Vincent took Marcus to the construction company, showing him how the business had grown and changed. He'd kept Marcus's name on the incorporation papers, never fully giving up hope that his son would one day return. "I still want you to have this," Vincent said as they stood in the office that would have been Marcus's. "I know the military is your life now, but this will be here when you're ready to come home." Marcus looked around the office, at the blueprints and contracts and photographs of completed projects. It represented everything his father had worked for, everything he'd wanted to give his son. "Not ready to leave the military yet," Marcus said. "I have a commitment to my soldiers, to my country. But maybe someday, ... Vincent nodded. "I'll keep it running until you are, however long that takes." They also talked about Alina, about how she'd been the bridge between them even when they couldn't see it. She'd kept Vincent informed about Marcus's military career and kept Marcus connected to home through her letters. She'd suffered through their feud, watching the two men she loved most tear each other apart. "She never gave up on us," Vincent said one evening as they sat on the front porch, "even when we gave up on each other." Marcus watched his mother through the kitchen window, preparing dinner just as she had throughout his childhood. "She's stronger than both of us combined. Always has been." The week passed too quickly. Marcus's leave was ending, and he had to return to Fort Bragg to begin his new assignment. But this time, he wouldn't be leaving in anger or shame. This time, he'd be leaving as a son returning to duty, with his father's blessing and support. Night before his departure, the family sat together in the living room, talking about the future. Marcus told them about his plans to continue his military career, about his goals for advancement and leadership. Vincent listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering support. "I want you to know that I'm proud of the man you've become," Vincent said. "Not just because of the medal, not just because of what you did in Afghanistan, but because of who you are. You're a better man than I ever was." "I'm the man I am because of what you taught me," Marcus replied. "She taught me to work hard, too. Take responsibility, to build things that last. I just applied those lessons to being a soldier instead of a construction worker." Alina smiled through her tears. "You're both stubborn and proud and too hard on yourselves. But you're also good men who love each other. That's all that matters." Marcus returned to Fort Bragg with a lighter heart than he'd carried in years. The reconciliation with his father had freed him from the burden of anger and resentment that had driven him for so long. He threw himself into his new role as a senior non-commissioned officer, but now he was fighting for the right reasons. Not to prove his worth to anyone, but because he believed in the mission and the men under his command. He began calling home regularly, something he'd never done before. Vincent would update him on the construction business, sharing stories about difficult clients and successful projects. Marcus would tell his father about training exercises and leadership challenges, finding that Vincent's business experience often provided valuable insights into military leadership. Alina was delighted to have both her men talking to each other again. She'd send care packages to Marcus with notes from both parents, and she'd share Marcus's letters with Vincent, who would read them with the pride he'd never been able to express before. 6 months after Marcus's return to duty, Vincent made a decision that surprised everyone. He announced that he was shutting down Rivera Construction temporarily to visit his son at Fort Bragg. "I've never seen where you work," Vincent told Marcus over the phone. "I'd like to understand this part of your life." Marcus was touched by the gesture. His father had never been comfortable traveling, had never shown interest in the military beyond watching war movies on television. But Vincent was making an effort to bridge the gap between their two worlds. The visit was a success. Vincent was impressed by Marcus's professionalism, by the respect he commanded from his subordinates, and by the complexity of modern military operations. Marcus was proud to show his father around, to introduce him to his fellow soldiers, and to demonstrate the skills he'd learned. "I understand now why you had to do this," Vincent said on the last day of his visit. "This isn't just a job for you. It's a calling." "I'm sorry it took me so long to see that. I learned the value of hard work and dedication from you," Marcus replied. "I just applied it to a different kind of construction, building soldiers." "Instead of buildings?" Vincent laughed. "I never thought of it that way, but you're right. We're both in the construction business. We just use different tools." 2 years later, Marcus received news that would change his life again. He was being promoted to Sergeant Major, the highest enlisted rank in the Army. The promotion came with a new assignment. He would be returning to Fort Benning, Georgia, the same place where he'd completed basic training 5 years earlier. But this time, he would be training the next generation of soldiers, passing on the lessons he'd learned. In combat and leadership, it was a position of tremendous responsibility and honor. Marcus felt ready for the challenge. The promotion ceremony was held at Fort Bragg, and this time, Vincent and Alina were in the front row. Vincent wore his best suit and looked uncomfortable in the formal military setting, but his pride was evident to everyone present. After the ceremony, Marcus's commanding officer approached Vincent. "Your son is one of the finest soldiers I've ever served with," the colonel said. "You raised a hell of a man." Vincent's chest swelled with pride. He raised himself, "Sir. I just provided the foundation." That evening, the family celebrated at a restaurant near the base. Marcus was surprised when Jake Morrison appeared, now a staff sergeant himself and serving at a nearby installation. "Couldn't miss seeing the old man get his stripes," Jake said, embracing his friend. "Remember when you used to say you didn't have a father? Look at you now. You've got 2 proud parents and a chest full of medals." Vincent overheard the comment and approached Jake. "Thank you for being there for my son when I couldn't be," he said. "Ow. I know he's told me about how you looked out for him." Jake shook Vincent's hand. "Ach, Marcus looked out for all of us, sir. He's the best soldier I've ever known, and I'm proud to call him my friend." The evening was filled with laughter and stories, with toasts to the future and acknowledgments of the past. Marcus looked around the table at his family and friends, at the life he'd built despite the rocky start, and felt a deep sense of contentment. Later, as Vincent and Alina prepared to fly back to Texas, Vincent pulled Marcus aside. "I have something for you," he said, handing Marcus a small wrapped package. Inside was a watch, not an expensive one, but one that Marcus recognized. It was the watch Vincent had worn every day for as long as Marcus could remember. The watch that had timed countless construction projects and family milestones. I want you to have this, Vincent said. It's not much, but it's been with me through everything. I thought it might remind you that no matter how far you go, you've always got family backing you up. Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. Dad, I can't take this. It's yours. It's yours now. Just like everything else I've got. I'm proud of you, son. Proud of the soldier you've become. Proud of the man you've always been. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. Marcus put on the watch, feeling the weight of his father's love and acceptance. I love you, Dad. Thank you for not giving up on me. I never gave up on you, Marcus. I just forgot how to show it. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. 10 years after that fateful day when Vincent Rivera had declared his son dead to him, Marcus stood in the same living room where it had all begun. But now he was Sergeant Major Rivera, a decorated war hero and respected military leader. More importantly, he was a son who had found his way back home. Vincent, now in his 60s, had officially retired from Rivera Construction, though he still went to the office most days to supervise the younger workers. The business was thriving under the management of Vincent's trusted foreman, with the understanding that it would be there for Marcus whenever he decided to leave the military. Alina, now a grandmother to Jake Morrison's children, Jake had married, and moved to Texas to work for Rivera Construction, spent her days spoiling her honorary grandchildren and sending care packages to soldiers deployed overseas. She'd become something of a den mother to Marcus's former squad members, many of whom stayed in touch and considered the Rivera family their own. Marcus had served with distinction at Fort Benning, training thousands of new soldiers and helping to shape the next generation of military leaders. He'd been offered multiple opportunities for advancement, including a commission as an officer, but he'd chosen to remain an enlisted soldier, feeling that his calling was to serve the men and women at the ground level. The Medal of Honor sat in a place of honor in his childhood bedroom, along with the numerous other decorations he'd earned throughout his career, but the award that meant the most to him was a small framed photograph that Vincent had given him, a picture of Marcus in his dress uniform. Standing next to his father after the promotion ceremony, Vincent had written on the back, "To my son, the soldier, I couldn't be prouder. Love, Dad." The relationship between father and son had evolved into something deeper and more meaningful than either had imagined possible. They spoke regularly, visited frequently, and had learned to appreciate each other's strengths and forgive each other's weaknesses. Vincent had become something of a celebrity in Millbrook, known as the father of the local war hero. He'd never sought the attention, but he'd learned to accept it gracefully, always deflecting praise back to his son and the other soldiers serving overseas. One evening, Marcus prepared to return to base after a visit home. Vincent joined him on the front porch where they'd had so many difficult conversations over the years. "I've been thinking about what you said a few years ago," Vincent said, "about how we're both in the construction business." Marcus nodded. "Different tools, same goal." "I think you're wrong about that." Marcus looked at his father, surprised. "I think you're building something more important than I ever did. I build buildings that might last 50 years, maybe 100 if they're well made. But you're building men and women who will carry what you've taught them for the rest of their lives. They'll pass it on to their soldiers, their children, their communities. That's a legacy that will last forever." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had when his father had first called him son again after 3 years of silence. "I learned how to build things that last from you, Dad. The only difference is that you taught me to build with my hands, and I learned to build with my heart." Vincent smiled. Maybe that's what I was really building all along, not a business, but a man who would know how to build something even better. As Marcus drove away from his childhood home, he looked in the rearview mirror at his father standing in the driveway, waving goodbye. The man who had once called him dead was now the strongest supporter of his life, the proudest advocate of his achievements. The circle was complete. The prodigal soldier had come home not as a lost son seeking forgiveness, but as a man who had found his purpose and his place in the world. The war hero's greatest victory hadn't been on a battlefield in Afghanistan, but in a living room in Millbrook, Texas, where father and son had learned to love each other again. Marcus Rivera had served his country with honor, had saved lives, and led men through the crucible of combat. But his greatest achievement was proving that some things, family, love, forgiveness, are worth fighting for. No matter how long the battle takes, the watch on his wrist, his father's watch, ticked steadily as he drove through the Texas night. It was keeping time for a new chapter in both their lives, a chapter built on the foundation of mutual respect, hard-won wisdom, and the understanding that sometimes the greatest courage is required not on foreign battlefields, but in the quiet moments when we choose to forgive and be forgiven. The war was over. The soldier was home. The father and son were reunited. And in the end, that victory was worth more than any medal or decoration could ever be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Let's click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.